Question 1. Match each description of an Azure AI Foundry deployment environment with the correct deployment type. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Hosted within Azure AI Foundry project resource. Standard deployment uses Microsoft-managed dedicated serverless endpoints. Serverless compute runs models in managed virtual machine images. Managed compute. Now let us break it down clearly. We start with standard deployment. This option is correct because models are hosted directly inside the Azure AI Foundry project resource itself. Therefore, it is designed for models managed within the project without separate infrastructure management. Next, we look at serverless compute. This fits the description of Microsoft-managed, dedicated serverless endpoints. Consequently, scaling and billing are handled automatically based on usage, which removes the need for capacity planning. Finally, managed compute applies to models running in managed virtual machine images. As a result, this option is used when you need more control over the compute environment while still relying on Azure-managed virtual machines. Question 2. For each endpoint type, drag it to the universally correct description. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Access project connections, agents, and models programmatically. Project endpoint. Call Azure OpenAI REST operations exposed through the project's resource. Azure OpenAI Service APIs endpoint. Use Azure AI services such as vision and language via REST. Azure AI Services APIs endpoint. Now let us walk through the reasoning. We begin with the project endpoint. This is correct because it serves as the main entry point your code uses to interact with project-level assets, such as connections, agents, and deployed models. Therefore, any programmatic access to project resources flows through this endpoint. Next, we look at the Azure OpenAI Service APIs endpoint. This endpoint specifically exposes Azure OpenAI REST operations like chat completions and text generation. Consequently, when calling OpenAI models through the project's Azure OpenAI resource, this is the correct match. Finally, the Azure AI Services APIs endpoint applies to services like vision and language. As a result, when you access these AI services directly over REST, this endpoint is used rather than the project or OpenAI-specific endpoints. Question 3. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Connections.name, include credentials true, may return credentials in the form of an API key for an Azure AI Services resource. True. A connection object can be used to connect to the associated external service because it includes connection-specific properties. True. The connection type filter accepts free-form strings like OpenAI rather than an enumeration. False. Connections.list cannot be filtered by type. False. Now let us walk through the reasoning. We begin with the first statement. When include credentials is set to true, the returned object may include credentials such as an API key. Therefore, this enables authenticated access to the external Azure AI service. Next, the second statement is true, because connection objects expose connection-specific properties. As a result, these properties allow your application to successfully connect to and use the associated external service. In contrast, the third statement is false. The connection type parameter expects a defined enumeration value rather than an arbitrary string. Consequently, free-form values like OpenAI are not accepted. Finally, the fourth statement is also false. Connections.list supports server-side filtering using the optional connection type parameter. Therefore, filtering by type is fully supported. Question 4. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. When configuring a fine-tuning job in the portal, larger batch sizes generally pair well with a higher learning rate multiplier, while the number of epochs controls how many times the model sees the dataset. Setting a seed aims to improve reproducibility of results. Now let us go step by step. We start with batch sizes and learning rate multiplier. Larger batch sizes allow the model to process more samples at once. Therefore, pairing them with a higher learning rate multiplier helps the model learn efficiently without slowing training. Next, the number of epochs controls how many times the model iterates over the full dataset. As a result, increasing epochs directly affects how thoroughly the model learns from the training data. Finally, setting a seed improves reproducibility. Consequently, using the same seed helps ensure that training results are consistent and repeatable across multiple runs. Question 5. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Standalone Azure AI resources provide an endpoint and keys for secure client access. True, regional quota restrictions may apply to AI services within a subscription. True, Azure AI pricing calculator can be used to estimate the cost of expected usage. True, all multi-service resources automatically include Azure OpenAI. False. Now let us understand why this is correct. We begin with the first statement. Standalone Azure AI resources expose their own endpoint and authorization keys. Therefore, clients can securely access the service using those credentials. Next, the second statement is true. Quotas are enforced at the subscription and regional level. Consequently, availability and capacity can vary depending on where the service is deployed. Moving on, the third statement is also true. The Azure AI pricing calculator is specifically designed to help estimate expected usage costs. As a result, it is commonly used during planning and budgeting. Finally, the last statement is false. Not all multi-service resources include Azure OpenAI. Therefore, only specific Foundry multi-service resources provide Azure OpenAI, while standard Azure AI services resources do not. Question 6. Arrange the sequence of interactions when an application communicates with a deployed model through an endpoint. Instruction. Drag and drop the items into the correct order, starting with the first step at the top. Send API request to endpoint. Endpoint identifies the correct model. Model processes the input. API sends the output response back to the app. Now let us look at the logic behind it. The process begins when the application sends an API request to the endpoint. This request contains the input payload that needs to be processed. Next, the endpoint identifies the correct deployed model. Therefore, it determines which model and version should handle the incoming request. After that, the selected model processes the input. As a result, the model generates an output based on the request it received. Finally, the API sends the output response back to the application. Consequently, the application receives the model's result and can continue its workflow. Question 7. What is the default behavior of the include credentials parameter in connections.getName include credentials? Select one answer. A. It defaults to false, requiring explicit opt-in to receive credentials. B. It defaults to true, returning the credentials needed to connect to the target service. C. It is ignored unless the connection type is Azure OpenAI. D. It depends on the project level, hub versus project, where the connection is defined. The correct answer is B. It defaults to true, returning the credentials needed to connect to the target service. Now let us see how this works in practice. By default, include credentials is set to true. Therefore, when connections.get is called, the returned object already includes credentials such as an API key. As a result, the caller can immediately connect to the target service without any extra configuration. In contrast, option A is incorrect because false is not the default value. Option C is also incorrect, since the parameter applies to all connection types, not only Azure OpenAI. Finally, option D is incorrect because the default behavior does not change based on whether the connection is defined at the hub or project level. Question 8. A learning team primarily uses Azure AI Foundry, while a partner uses Azure Machine Learning Studio. How should they view the prompt flow guidance? Select one answer. A. It applies only to Azure AI Foundry and must be redesigned for Azure Machine Learning. B. It applies to both Azure Machine Learning Studio and Azure AI Foundry. C. It applies only to Azure Machine Learning Studio. D. It is deprecated in both environments. The correct answer is B. It applies to both Azure Machine Learning Studio and Azure AI Foundry. Now let us connect this to how it works in real use. Prompt flow guidance is shared across both Azure AI Foundry and Azure Machine Learning Studio. Therefore, teams working in either environment can rely on the same concepts, workflows, and best practices. In contrast, options A and C are incorrect because the guidance is not limited to a single platform. Likewise, option D is incorrect since prompt flow is actively supported and not deprecated. Consequently, the guidance transfers seamlessly between both environments. Question 9. A travel company wants customers to ask about room availability and amenities for specific hotels in its booking catalogue. Responses must reference the latest catalogue details. Which approach best ensures answers are grounded in current factual data? Select one answer. A. Use few-shot prompting with several example Q&A pairs. B. Fine-tune a base model on archived chat logs for stylistic consistency. C. Add a retrieval augmented generation component connected to the booking catalogue. D. Rely on zero-shot prompting to keep the system simple. The correct answer is C. Add a retrieval augmented generation component connected to the booking catalogue. Now let us see how this works in practice. Retrieval augmented generation first retrieves the most relevant and up-to-date hotel information directly from the booking catalogue. Therefore, the model generates responses that are grounded in current availability and amenities rather than relying on outdated training data. In contrast, few-shot prompting and zero-shot prompting influence how answers are phrased but do not guarantee factual accuracy. Likewise, fine-tuning improves style consistency, does not provide live access to the latest catalogue data. Consequently, RAG is the most reliable approach for ensuring accurate, current responses. Question 10. Which statement best describes the benefit of obtaining the chat client via the Azure AI Foundry SDK instead of connecting directly with the Azure OpenAI SDK? Select one answer. A. It lets you bypass authentication entirely. B. It scopes the client to the project's resource and lets you switch among deployed models by deployment name. C. It automatically creates new deployments when a model is first referenced. D. It removes the need to install the OpenAI package. The correct answer is B. It scopes the client to the project's resource and lets you switch among deployed models by deployment name. Now let us understand why this is correct. Using the Azure AI Foundry SDK scopes the chat client directly to the project's resource. Therefore, authentication is handled in the context of the project, and models are selected by deployment name rather than by manually managing endpoints. In contrast, option A is incorrect because authentication is still required. Option C is incorrect since deployments must already exist and are not created automatically. Finally, option D is incorrect because the OpenAI package is still required for the client to function. Consequently, scoping the client to the project and enabling deployment-based model switching is the key benefit. Question 11. You're in evaluation and refinement and notice performance drops on a larger dataset. What's the best next step? Select one answer. A. Immediately push to production to gather real user feedback. B. Revert to experimentation, modify the flow or prompt and retest on a smaller dataset before scaling back up. C. Add more categories without changing anything else. D. Ignore it. Variability is expected at larger scales. The correct answer is B. Revert to experimentation, modify the flow or prompt, and retest on a smaller dataset before scaling back up. Now let us walk through the reasoning. When performance drops at scale, the correct approach is to step back into experimentation. Therefore, adjusting the flow or prompt and validating changes on a smaller dataset helps isolate issues before rescaling. In contrast, immediately pushing to production is premature. Adding more categories does not address underlying performance problems. Likewise, ignoring the issue goes against recommended refinement practices. Consequently, iterating and retesting before scaling up is the best next step. Question 12. Your evaluation dashboard shows high fluency but low groundedness on retrieval augmented answers. What should you prioritize? Select one answer. A. Improve evidence use so outputs align with the source or database. B. Reduce response length to increase readability. C. Lower temperature to fix grammar issues. D. Ignore it. Fluency guarantees correctness. The correct answer is A. Improve evidence use so outputs align with the source or database. Now let us clarify the reasoning. High fluency means the responses sound smooth and well written. However, low groundedness indicates the answers are not sufficiently tied to retrieved evidence. Therefore, prioritizing stronger evidence use ensures outputs accurately reflect the source data. In contrast, reducing response length only affects readability and not factual alignment. Lowering temperature changes variability and style, not grounding. Ignoring the issue is incorrect because fluent answers can still be inaccurate. Consequently, improving evidence alignment is the most important next step. Question 13. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. AI agents can orchestrate workflows and coordinate workloads, not just answer questions. True. The expense agent process ends with the generation of a check payment. True. A travel booking agent requires manual submission of expense claims after booking travel. False. The expenses agent is responsible for booking hotel accommodations. False. Now let us break it down clearly. We begin with the first statement. AI agents are not limited to answering questions. Therefore, they can orchestrate multi-step workflows and coordinate workloads across systems. Next, the second statement is true. The described expense agent workflow concludes with claim processing and check payment. As a result, payment generation is the final step in that process. In contrast, the third statement is false. Travel booking agents can automatically initiate expense claims after travel is booked. Consequently, manual submission is reduced or eliminated. Finally, the fourth statement is also false. The expenses agent focuses on claim submission and processing. Therefore, it does not handle travel or hotel reservations, which are managed by separate booking agents. Question 14. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. The minimum required resources for an agent are Azure AI Hub and Azure AI Project, but developers can add more Azure services, if needed. Resources may be deployed either through the Azure AI Foundry portal or via Bicep templates. Now let us go step by step. We start with the minimum requirements. An agent must have an Azure AI Hub and an Azure AI Project. Therefore, these two resources form the foundational setup needed to create and manage agents. Next, more Azure services can be added if needed. As a result, developers can extend functionality by integrating additional Azure capabilities beyond the minimum requirements. Finally, resources can be deployed using different methods. The Azure AI Foundry portal provides a guided, portal-based deployment experience. Alternatively, Bicep templates support infrastructure as code deployments. Consequently, teams can choose the deployment approach that best fits their workflow. Question 15. For each MCP dynamic tool discovery role or mechanism, drag it to the appropriate boxes in the correct match column to match it against its description in the option column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Hosts a catalog of executable functionality exposed as tools. MCP server allows the agent side to fetch tool metadata and generate function wrappers. MCP client exposes server functions as discoverable tools via a decorator at mcp.tool. Decra calls discovered tools to fulfill user requests. Azure AI Agent centralizes additions, updates, and removals of tools without changing agent code. MCP server. Now let us break it down clearly. We begin with the MCP server. It hosts a live catalog of tools. Therefore, capabilities are discovered centrally and updates can be made without modifying agent-side code. Next, the MCP client runs on the agent side. It connects to the server, retrieves tool metadata, and generates function wrappers. As a result, tools become usable by the agent at runtime. Then the mcp.tool decorator marks server-side functions as tools. Consequently, those functions are exposed in the catalog and become discoverable by clients. Finally, the Azure AI agent uses the discovered and wrapped tools. Therefore, it can call them dynamically to fulfill user requests during execution. Unused items such as hard-coded tool registry and static SDK binding do not apply here. Consequently, they are excluded because they contradict runtime dynamic tool discovery. Question 16. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. An agent skill defines a specific function that an agent can perform, while an agent card serves as a structured profile that describes the agent's identity, endpoint, and available skills. Now let us understand why this is correct. We start with agent skill. An agent skill represents a clearly defined task or capability. Therefore, it describes what the agent can do at a functional level. Next, the agent card provides structured metadata. As a result, it describes the agent's identity, how it can be accessed, and which skills it exposes. Consequently, other agents or systems can discover and interact with it effectively. Question 17. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. Hosting an A2A agent allows other agents to discover and communicate with it in real time. True. The A2A server directly generates the agent's skills and abilities. False. Even a simple Hello World agent can be hosted and respond to requests through an endpoint. True. Hosting prevents an agent from participating in multi-agent workflows. False. Now let us break it down clearly. We begin with the first statement. Hosting exposes the agent through HTTP endpoints. Therefore, other agents can discover it and communicate with it in real time. Next, the second statement is false. The A2A server does not generate an agent's skills. Instead, skills are defined through the agent card and execution logic. Moving on, the third statement is true. Even a minimal Hello World agent can be hosted. As a result, it can receive requests and return responses through its endpoint. Finally, the last statement is false. Hosting enables participation in multi-agent workflows by making agents accessible to one another. Consequently, hosting supports collaboration rather than preventing it. Question 18. A business is developing a digital assistant that must execute functions, plan tasks, and maintain memory within a single environment without relying on multiple services. Which capability enables this in Azure AI Foundry agents? Select one answer. A. The self-contained runtime that supports integrated function execution, planning, and memory access. B. Manual coordination between multiple AI services and storage accounts. C. External task orchestration using separate Azure functions. D. A lightweight client for simple stateless API calls. The correct answer is A. The self-contained runtime that supports integrated function execution, planning, and memory access. Now let us understand why this is correct. Azure AI Foundry agents provide a self-contained runtime. Therefore, function execution, planning, and memory are handled within a single integrated environment. As a result, there is no need to coordinate multiple external services to achieve these capabilities. In contrast, manual coordination and external orchestration add unnecessary complexity. Likewise, a lightweight stateless client does not support planning or memory. Consequently, the integrated agent runtime is the correct capability for this scenario. Question 19. A developer wants to use Azure AI Foundry agent for a simple chatbot that answers single-turn questions, but also plans to manage ongoing conversations for specific users later. Which approach should the developer use? Select one answer. A. Create a separate chat agent instance for every user query. B. Avoid thread creation and store messages manually. C. Use explicit thread management for both single-turn and multi-turn interactions. D. Enable automatic thread creation for simple queries and use explicit thread management for long-running conversations. The correct answer is D. Enable automatic thread creation for simple queries and use explicit thread management for long-running conversations. Now let us walk through the reasoning. Automatic thread creation is ideal for simple one-off questions. Therefore, the developer avoids extra overhead when there is no need to preserve context. However, for ongoing conversations tied to specific users, explicit thread management is the better choice. Consequently, the developer can keep conversation state and context across multiple turns and sessions. In contrast, creating a new chat agent instance each time wastes resources. Storing messages manually is unnecessary because threads already manage state. Likewise, forcing explicit thread management for every single turn request adds complexity without benefits. Question 20. A research automation system relies on several specialized AI agents. One queries databases, another updates cloud records, and another validates entries through APIs. The team wants these agents to collaborate under a manager that decides dynamically which one acts next while allowing direct interaction with external services. Which orchestration pattern would best support this design? Select one answer. A. Reactive planning pattern. B. Magentic orchestration pattern. C. Static delegation pattern. D. Rule-based task scheduler. The correct answer is B. Magentic orchestration pattern. Now let us look at the logic behind it. The magentic orchestration pattern uses a central manager agent to coordinate multiple specialized agents. Therefore, it can dynamically decide which agent should act next based on context, progress, and intermediate results. At the same time, each specialized agent can directly interact with external systems such as databases, cloud resources, or APIs. Consequently, the system supports flexible, adaptive collaboration rather than fixed workflows. In contrast, reactive planning lacks centralized coordination. Static delegation relies on fixed assignments. Rule-based schedulers depend on predefined rules and do not adapt dynamically. As a result, the magentic orchestration pattern best fits this design. Question 21. In a complex analytical project, an orchestration system must divide a large goal into smaller subtasks and refine each iteratively until a complete solution emerges. Which capability makes this possible? Select one answer. A. Avoiding subtask creation to reduce processing time. B. Breaking down complex problems into manageable subtasks and refining them iteratively. C. Relying on a single general-purpose agent to perform all operations. D. Executing only one fixed workflow path from start to finish. The correct answer is B. Breaking down complex problems into manageable subtasks and refining them iteratively. Now let us break it down clearly. This capability allows the system to decompose a large, complex goal into smaller, focused subtasks. Therefore, each part can be addressed independently and improved step by step as new insights emerge. As the process continues, the system iteratively refines these subtasks. Consequently, progress is adaptive rather than fixed, and the overall solution evolves toward completion. In contrast, avoiding subtasks removes flexibility. Relying on a single agent limits specialization. Executing a fixed workflow path prevents iterative improvement. As a result, iterative subtask decomposition is the key capability that enables this approach. Question 22. You are designing an intelligent assistant for employees to handle routine financial tasks. The assistant needs to both answer questions about corporate policies and automatically file recurring expense claims such as monthly cell phone bills. What type of solution best fulfills these requirements? Select one answer. A. AI agents that combine generative models, contextual data, and task automation. B. A basic chatbot designed only for natural conversation. C. A traditional database query system. D. A manual workflow with human approval at every step. The correct answer is A. AI agents that combine generative models, contextual data, and task automation. Now let us see how this works in practice. This type of AI agent can interpret employee questions using corporate policy documents. Therefore, it can provide accurate, context-aware answers while also automating repetitive tasks such as filing recurring expense claims. In contrast, a basic chatbot lacks task automation capabilities. A database query system can retrieve data but cannot act on it. A fully manual workflow defeats the goal of automation. Consequently, AI agents that integrate generation, context, and automation are the best fit for this scenario. Question 23. Which of the following best describes one of the lifecycle capabilities of Azure AI Foundry Agent Service? Select one answer. A. Hosting Windows virtual machines. B. Testing AI agents. C. Building container registries. D. Deploying SQL databases. The correct answer is B. Testing AI agents. Now let us understand why this is correct. Azure AI Foundry Agent Service supports the full lifecycle of agents. Therefore, it includes creating, testing, refining, and managing AI agents before and after deployment. In contrast, hosting virtual machines is handled by Azure Infrastructure Services. Building container registries belongs to Azure Container Registry. Deploying SQL databases is part of Azure Database Services. Consequently, testing AI agents is the lifecycle capability that directly applies to Azure AI Foundry Agent Service. Question 24. Which two approaches let you assign tools to an agent? Select two answers. A. Azure AI Foundry Portal. B. SDK Code Definitions. C. MATLAB Studio Integration. D. Enter ID Authentication. The correct answers are A. Azure AI Foundry Portal and B. SDK Code Definitions. Now let us break it down clearly. Using the Azure AI Foundry Portal allows tools to be assigned during agent creation or configuration through the graphical interface. Therefore, developers can manage tools without writing code. Using SDK Code Definitions enables tools to be specified programmatically when defining the agent. Consequently, this approach supports automation, version control, and advanced customization. In contrast, MATLAB Studio Integration is not a supported method for assigning tools. Enter ID authentication is used for identity and access management, not for tool assignment. As a result, the valid approaches are the portal and SDK code definitions. Question 25. What types of information can the event queue deliver from an agent executor back to a client or another agent? Select one answer. A. Only text-based messages. B. Messages, task updates, or artifacts generated by the task. C. System logs and debug reports only. D. Only cancellation confirmations. The correct answer is B. Messages, task updates, or artifacts generated by the task. Now, let us understand why this is correct. The event queue is designed to transmit a variety of event data. Therefore, it can deliver messages, progress or task updates, and artifacts produced during task execution. In contrast, it is not limited to plain text. It does not serve only system logs or debug information. It also handles far more than cancellation notices. Consequently, the most accurate description is that it delivers messages, task updates, and generated artifacts. Question 26. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. Azure AI Language SDKs abstract JSON requests into code objects and methods. True. Developers must manually format JSON when using SDKs for C# or Python. False. REST requests to Azure AI Language are always handled without authentication keys. False. The JSON request and response format enables consistent integration across SDKs and REST calls. True. Now let us break it down clearly. We begin with the first statement. Azure AI Language SDKs handle JSON internally. Therefore, developers work with code objects and methods that are constructing raw JSON payloads. Next, the second statement is false. SDKs for C# and Python automatically generate the required JSON. Consequently, manual JSON formatting is rarely necessary. In contrast, the third statement is false. REST requests must be authenticated using a valid endpoint and key. As a result, authentication is always required for secure access. Finally, the fourth statement is true. The standardized JSON structure ensures compatibility. Therefore, integrations behave consistently, whether using SDKs or direct REST calls. Question 27. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. Entity recognition identifies entities in text and groups them into categories such as person, location, and date time. Each detected entity includes details like its offset, length, and confidence score. Now let us go step by step. Entity recognition works by detecting entities within text. Therefore, items such as people, places, and dates are identified and classified into categories like person, location, and date time. Each detected entity also includes metadata. As a result, the offset shows where the entity appears in the text. The length indicates how many characters it spans, and the confidence score represents how confident the model is in the detection. Question 28. For each entity linking JSON field, drag it to its correct description in the correct match column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Specifies the operation type performed by the service. Kind contains the entity recognition results for each document. Results represents the detected entity's name found in the text. Name provides the external identifier for the entity within Bing's data graph. Bing ID holds the exact text fragment where the entity appears. Text defines the number of characters occupied by the detected text. Length provides the article link that best matches the entity. URL indicates the database used for linking entities. Data source specifies which trained model version was used for the analysis. Model version. Now let us break it down clearly. We begin with kind. This field identifies the analysis operation performed by the service. In this case, it indicates entity linking. Next, results contains the output for each analyzed document. Therefore, it acts as the container for all entity linking results returned by the service. Moving on, name represents the recognized entity name found in the text. The Bing ID then provides a unique identifier from Bing's knowledge graph. Consequently, this allows precise disambiguation of the entity. The text field holds the exact text fragment matched to the entity. In parallel, length specifies how many characters that fragment spans. Finally, URL provides the link to the best matching reference article. Data source indicates the knowledge base used for linking, such as Wikipedia. Model version specifies which trained model produced the analysis. Question 29. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. To make a neural voice sound cheerful while ensuring SQL is spoken as SQL, include an expressive style, directive, and a phoneme specification within the SSML. Now let us break it down clearly. An expressive style directive controls the emotional tone of the neural voice. Therefore, using a cheerful style makes the voice sound more upbeat and engaging. At the same time, a phoneme specification defines how specific words are pronounced. Consequently, it ensures that SQL is spoken as SQL rather than spelled out or mispronounced. Question 30. Match each audio content method to its correct description. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Represents an audio file located on a website. Audio URL embeds local audio data directly within the prompt. Binary audio data uses a base 64 encoded string as the data format. Base 64 encoded data. Now let us break it down clearly. We begin with audio URL. This method is used when the audio file already exists online. Therefore, the prompt simply references the web location of the audio instead of embedding the data itself. Next, binary audio data represents locally stored audio. As a result, the raw audio content is embedded directly within the request payload. Finally, base 64 encoded data is used to safely transmit binary audio in text-based formats. Consequently, the binary audio is encoded as a base 64 string, so it can be included inline within the JSON prompt. Text-only content and image reference do not apply in this scenario. Therefore, they are not part of the correct matches for audio input methods. Question 31. A developer has created a language resource in Azure and trained a conversational model. They now want to send user queries and receive predictions from the same resource without creating a new one. What should they do? Select one answer. A. Create a second language resource dedicated to prediction. B. Use the existing language resource for both authoring and querying. C. Deploy the model to a separate Azure region. D. Store the model in Azure Blob Storage for querying. The correct answer is B. Use the existing language resource for both authoring and querying. Now let us understand why this is correct. An Azure AI language resource is designed to support the full life cycle of a model. Therefore, the same resource can be used for authoring and training the model, as well as for querying it to get predictions. In contrast, creating a second resource is unnecessary. Deploying to another region does not change how predictions are made. Storing a model in blob storage does not enable inference. Consequently, using the existing language resource for both authoring and querying is the correct approach. Question 32. A developer wants to make precise text indexing when sending conversation analysis requests through the .NET SDK. Which parameter should be used for string indexing? Select one answer. A. String index type equals word unit. B. String index type equals character unit. C. String index type equals UTF-8. D. String index type equals UTF-16 code unit. The correct answer is D. String index type equals UTF-16 code unit. Now let us break it down clearly. The .NET SDK uses UTF-16 encoding internally. Therefore, string positions such as offsets and lengths are calculated using UTF-16 code units. As a result, setting string index type to UTF-16 code unit ensures that the indexes returned by the service align exactly with how strings are represented in .NET. In contrast, UTF-8 is not the encoding used by the .NET SDK for indexing. Character unit and word unit are not valid indexing options in this context. Consequently, UTF-16 code unit is the correct and precise choice for string indexing. Question 33. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. Consistency means labeling the same kind of entity the same way across all files. True. Precision means selecting as much surrounding context as possible around the entity span. False. Completeness means labeling every occurrence of the target entity that appears in a file. True. In the labeling JSON, project kind is set to custom entity recognition in both metadata and assets. True. Now let us break it down clearly. We begin with consistency. Consistent labeling ensures the model sees uniform examples across the dataset. Therefore, entities of the same type are always labeled in the same way. Next, the second statement is false. Precision requires selecting only the exact entity span. As a result, including surrounding words or punctuation reduces precision rather than improving it. Moving on, completeness is correctly defined. Labeling every occurrence of the target entity prevents missed examples. Consequently, this improves recall during training. Finally, the last statement is true. For custom entity recognition projects, project kind must be declared consistently in both the metadata and assets sections. Therefore, the labeling JSON remains valid and aligned with the project configuration. Question 34. For each statement below, indicate whether it is true or false. Speech translation uses speech recognition to transcribe input before translation occurs. A separate Azure resource must be created for each language to be translated. False. The translation service can process multiple languages through one resource. True. An Azure AI speech resource can only be deployed without a subscription. False. Now let us break it down clearly. We begin with the first statement. Speech translation works by first converting spoken input into text. Therefore, speech recognition is a required step before translation can occur. Next, the second statement is false. A single Azure AI speech resource supports multiple languages. Consequently, creating a separate resource for each language is unnecessary. Moving on, the third statement is true. The translation service is designed to handle multiple source and target languages through the same resource. As a result, multilingual scenarios are supported without additional setup. Finally, the last statement is false. All Azure AI resources must be created within an Azure subscription. Therefore, an Azure AI speech resource cannot exist without a subscription. Question 35. An engineer wants to verify a deployed model's accuracy. Which dataset is used to calculate its performance score? Select one answer. A. Training dataset. B. Testing dataset. C. Production dataset. D. Validation dataset. The correct answer is B. Testing dataset. Now let us break it down clearly. The testing dataset is reserved specifically for evaluating model performance after training. Therefore, it provides an unbiased measure of accuracy that reflects how well the model performs on unseen data. In contrast, the training dataset is used to teach the model and cannot be used to fairly assess accuracy. Production data is not a defined evaluation dataset. Validation data supports tuning during training but does not represent the final performance score. Consequently, the testing dataset is the correct choice for calculating model accuracy. Question 36. What does the analysis input section of the request body contain in a custom NER API call? Select one answer. A. Documents with text to extract entities from. B. Definitions of custom entities. C. Authentication credentials. D. Model training configuration. The correct answer is A. Documents with text to extract entities from. Now let us break it down clearly. The analysis input section carries the input documents that contain the text you want analyzed. Therefore, this is where the service reads the content in order to extract custom entities from it. In contrast, entity definitions are set up in the project configuration rather than sent in each runtime request. Authentication credentials belong in request headers, not the body. Training configuration applies during model training, not during entity extraction. Consequently, analysis input contains the documents with text to extract entities from. Question 37. A product team is authoring IVR prompts using text-to-speech. The prompts include phone numbers and dates that must be spoken in the correct format, and the team also wants to apply a cheerful speaking style using a neural voice. Which SSML features should they use to meet these requirements? Select two answers. A. Use say-as rules to format dates and telephone numbers. B. Change the voice by increasing the audio sample rate. C. Apply an expressive style, for example cheerful for the neural voice. D. Rely on default spelling for pronouncing sequel. The correct answers are A. Use say-as rules to format dates and telephone numbers, and C. Apply an expressive style, for example cheerful, for the neural voice. Now let us break it down clearly. Say-as rules are designed to control how structured content is spoken. Therefore, they ensure phone numbers and dates are read in a natural, human-friendly format, rather than digit by digit. At the same time, an expressive style modifies the emotional tone of a neural voice. Consequently, applying a cheerful style makes the IVR prompt sound upbeat and engaging to callers. In contrast, increasing the audio sample rate only affects audio quality, not pronunciation or tone. Relying on default spelling does not guarantee correct spoken output for specialized terms. As a result, say-as rules and expressive style are the correct SSML features to meet these requirements. Question 38. In a JSON prompt for an audio-enabled chat, what values can the audio URL field contain? Select one answer. A. An array of user roles for conversation history. B. A Boolean value that flags audio activation. C. A link to a hosted audio file or a base64 encoded data URL. D. Only plain text transcriptions of audio content. The correct answer is C. A link to a hosted audio file or a base64 encoded data URL. Now let us break it down clearly. The audio URL field is used to supply audio input to the model. Therefore, it can reference a web-hosted audio file or include inline audio using a base64 encoded data URL. In contrast, conversation roles are defined elsewhere in the JSON structure. A Boolean flag does not provide audio content. Plain text transcriptions are outputs of audio processing, not valid inputs for this field. Consequently, a hosted audio link or a base64 encoded data URL is the correct and complete answer. Question 39. What is the role of the instructions parameter in a request session? Select one answer. A. Defines how the client connects to the WebSocket endpoint. B. Provides runtime hints for the voice agent's behavior and response style. C. Specifies which credentials should be used for authentication. D. Sets the model type, such as GPT-4o. The correct answer is B. Provides runtime hints for the voice agent's behavior and response style. Now let us break it down clearly. The instructions parameter is used to guide how the voice agent should behave at runtime. Therefore, it can define things like tone, role, or response style, such as acting as a helpful or professional assistant. In contrast, how the client connects to the WebSocket is defined elsewhere. Authentication credentials are configured using separate credential parameters. The model type is also specified independently. Consequently, the instructions parameter exists specifically to control the agent's behavior and how it responds during the session. Question 40. Which property in the JSON response contains the text that should be shown to the user as the answer? Select one answer. A. Questions. B. Answer. B. C. Metadata. The correct answer is B. Answer B. Now let us break it down clearly. The answer property contains the actual response text returned to the user. Therefore, this is the field your application displays as the final answer. In contrast, questions holds alternate phrasings linked to the same answer. Metadata provides descriptive information about the entry. Score represents a confidence value, not the response text. Consequently, the answer property is the correct field used to show the answer to the user. Question 41. Which two configurations are required when using Microsoft Entra authentication to connect to the VoiceLive API? Select two answers. A. Assign the Cognitive Services user role to the account or identity. B. Generate a token with the scope AI.azure.com default. Include the token as a query string parameter without encryption. D. Store the token inside the API request body. The correct answers are A. Assign the Cognitive Services user role to the account or identity, and B. Generate a token with the scope HTTP or AI.azure.com's default. Now let us break it down clearly. Assigning the Cognitive Services user role grants the identity the permissions needed to access the VoiceLive API. Therefore, without this role assignment, the request will fail authorization even if a token is presented. Next, generating a token with the scope https ai.azure.com/default ensures the access token is issued for the correct resource and permissions. Consequently, the API can validate the token and allow the connection. In contrast, sending tokens in an unencrypted query string is insecure and not the intended approach. Likewise, placing the token in the request body is unsupported because tokens are meant to be passed in the authorization header. As a result, the required configurations are role assignment and the correct token scope. Question 42. When setting up a VoiceLive API session, which two modalities can be defined in the configuration to specify communication types? Select two answers. A. Video. B. Image. C. Text. The correct answers are C. Text and D. Audio. Now let us break it down clearly. Text defines text-based input and output within the VoiceLive API session. Therefore, it enables messages, prompts, and responses to be exchanged in written form. Audio, on the other hand, activates real-time audio streaming and speech capabilities. Consequently, this allows spoken input and synthesized voice responses during the session. In contrast, image is not supported as a communication modality in VoiceLive sessions. Likewise, video is handled separately through technologies like WebRTC for avatars and is not defined as a session modality. As a result, the two valid modalities are text and audio. Question 43. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The Azure AI Vision endpoint typically follows a URL pattern like https:/resourcename.cognitiveservices.azure.com// True. Client applications can connect using either the REST API or a language-specific SDK such as Python or .NET. True. When working within an Azure AI Foundry project, you can use the Azure AI Foundry SDK with Microsoft Entra ID to retrieve connection details for the underlying AI services resource. The endpoint for Azure AI Vision is only visible in the Azure AI Foundry portal and cannot be found in the Azure portal. False. Now let us break it down clearly. The Azure AI Vision service exposes a standard HTTPS endpoint that uses the cognitiveservices.azure.com domain. Therefore, this predictable URL structure allows applications to connect consistently across environments. Next, developers are free to choose between calling the service directly through REST APIs or using SDKs such as Python or .NET. Consequently, teams can select the integration approach that best fits their development workflow. When using Azure AI Foundry, Microsoft Entra ID authentication can be combined with the Foundry SDK to programmatically retrieve connection details for the underlying AI services. As a result, credentials and endpoints can be managed securely without hard-coding values. Finally, the Vision endpoint is not restricted to the Azure AI Foundry portal. In fact, it is also visible and manageable in the standard Azure portal. Therefore, the statement claiming it cannot be found in the Azure portal is false. Question 44. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. An Azure AI Vision image must be smaller than 4 megabytes, and its dimensions must be greater than 50 × 50 pixels to be eligible for analysis. Now let us break it down clearly. The image size limit ensures the service can process the file efficiently. Therefore, any image larger than 4 megabytes will be rejected before analysis begins. Next, the minimum dimension requirement guarantees there is enough visual information for the model to analyze. Consequently, both the width and height must exceed 50 pixels for the image to qualify. In contrast, smaller dimensions like 10 and 10 pixels do not contain sufficient detail. Likewise, larger limits such as 8 megabytes exceed the supported file size. As a result, the correct requirements are an image under 4 megabytes with dimensions greater than 50 × 50 pixels. Question 45. For each Azure Video Indexer capability, drag it to the appropriate description in the correct match column. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Detects the presence of specific people in video frames. Facial recognition. Extracts spoken words into a time-aligned transcript. Speech transcription. Reads on-screen text that appears in frames. Optical character recognition. Identifies key discussion subjects across the video. Topics. Assesses positive or negative tone in segments. Sentiment. Breaks the video into structural units. Scene segmentation. Flags adult or violent themes. Content moderation. Applies tags for notable objects or themes. Labels. Let us walk through the reasoning. Facial recognition is responsible for identifying known individuals that appear within video frames. Therefore, it applies specifically when the task involves detecting people. Speech transcription converts spoken dialogue into a synchronized text transcript. Consequently, it enables search, accessibility, and deeper language analysis. Optical character recognition focuses on extracting visible text directly from video frames. As a result, titles, signs, or slides shown on screen can be indexed. Topics capture the main subjects discussed throughout the video. Meanwhile, sentiment evaluates whether speech segments carry a positive, negative, or neutral tone. Scene segmentation divides the video into meaningful structural sections. This supports navigation, summarization, and content organization. Content moderation detects adult or violent material to support compliance and safety requirements. Finally, labels assign descriptive tags to recurring objects or themes across the video. Together, these capabilities allow Azure Video Indexer to analyze audio, visual, and semantic elements of video content in a structured and searchable way. Question 46. A compliance reviewer wants uploaded meeting recordings to automatically highlight appearances of specific internal executives, regardless of which video they're in, after you've added their face images and trained the model with appropriate approval. What outcome should they expect? Select one answer. A. Recognition will apply across all videos analyzed after training. B. Recognition will only in the single video used for training. C. Recognition requires adding those faces to every video manually. D. Recognition is automatic without limited access approval. The correct answer is A. Recognition will apply across all videos analyzed after training. Let us understand why this is correct. Once a custom people model is trained with approved face images, it generalizes beyond the original training video. Therefore, the system can identify those executives in any future meeting recordings that are analyzed. In contrast, recognition is not limited to the single training video. Likewise, manual face tagging is unnecessary after training because detection happens automatically. Additionally, limited access approval is still required, so recognition is not enabled by default. As a result, the expected outcome is that recognition applies consistently across all videos processed after the model has been trained. Question 47. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. A deployed endpoint is required for a client to submit prompts and receive responses. True, a multi-part user message can include both a text item and an image item. True, when sending a local image as base64, the value is placed in the image URL.url field using a data URL format. True, the only valid way to provide an image is by public HTTP URL. Base64 is not supported. False. Let us walk through the reasoning. A deployed endpoint is necessary because it exposes the model for inference. Therefore, without an endpoint, the client has no way to send prompts or receive responses. Next, multi-part user messages are designed to support multimodal inputs. Consequently, a single message can include both text and image items together. When a local image is encoded as base64, it is wrapped in a data URL and assigned to the image URL.url field. As a result, the service can process locally sourced images without requiring public hosting. In contrast, images are not limited to public HTTP URLs. Base64 encoded data URLs are also fully supported. Therefore, the statement claiming Base64 is unsupported is false. Question 48. A support team receives a 5.2 megabyte TIFF image captured at 40 x 40 pixels. They must analyze it with Azure AI Vision. Which actions are required to meet the service's input requirements? Select 3 answers. A. Convert the image to a supported format such as PNG. B. Resize the image so both width and height exceed 50 pixels. C. Compress or re-encode so the file size is under 4 megabyte. D. Submit as is by pasting the TIFF file path into the endpoint URL. E. Use video analysis instead of image analysis. The correct answers are A. Convert the image to a supported format such as PNG. B. Resize the image so both width and height exceed 50 pixels. And C. Compress or re-encode so the file size is under 4 megabyte. Let us see how this works in practice. Azure AI Vision only accepts specific image formats such as JPEG or PNG. Therefore, a TIFF image must be converted before it can be analyzed. In addition, the service enforces a minimum image size requirement. Consequently, both the width and height must be greater than 50 pixels, which means the 40 x 40 image must be resized. There is also a strict file size limit. As a result, the image must be compressed or re-encoded so it is smaller than 4 megabytes before submission. By contrast, submitting a local file path directly to the endpoint is unsupported. Likewise, video analysis is unnecessary because the input is a single image, not a video stream. Question 49. What determines which properties and fields appear in the JSON response when an image is analyzed? Select one answer. A. The image's resolution. B. The features specified in the request. C. The Azure region of the resource. D. The client SDK language used. The correct answer is B. The features specified in the request. Let us look at the logic behind it. The image analysis response is shaped by the visual features you explicitly request. Therefore, if you ask for captions, tags, or object detection, only those corresponding sections appear in the JSON output. In contrast, the image resolution may influence detection quality, but does not control the response structure. Likewise, the Azure region does not change which fields are returned, because the schema remains consistent across regions. Similarly, the SDK language used simply wraps the same REST response and does not alter the JSON fields. As a result, the properties and fields in the response are determined by the features specified in the request. Question 50. Which statement accurately describes the Azure AI Custom Vision portal? Select one answer. A. It allows training, publishing and testing of models through a graphical interface. B. It is used only for text-based model training. C. It replaces the need for SDK-based model development. D. It is accessible only through the Azure portal, not a standalone site. The correct answer is A. It allows training, publishing and testing of models through a graphical interface. Here is why this answer fits. The Azure AI Custom Vision portal provides a visual browser-based interface where users can upload images, label data, train models, publish them, and test predictions. Therefore, it supports the full life cycle of image classification and object detection without requiring immediate code interaction. By comparison, the portal is not limited to text-based training, as it is specifically designed for visual AI scenarios. Likewise, it does not eliminate SDK usage, because SDKs are still commonly used for programmatic training and inference. In addition, the portal is available as a standalone website, not only through the Azure portal. As a result, the accurate description is that the Azure AI Custom Vision portal enables training, publishing, and testing of models through a graphical interface. Question 51. You're coordinating a large dataset that needs many annotators working in parallel. The team prefers a labeling system with role assignment and review queues. You still plan to train and serve the detector using an API that expects normalized 0-1 boxes. What approach best fits the requirements? Select one answer. A. Use a third-party labeling tool that supports multi-user workflows and export labels in normalized format. B. Change the task to image classification to avoid needing bounding boxes. C. Start with the portal's smart labeler to auto-generate tags before training. D. Limit labeling to a single user to reduce the chance of format inconsistencies. The correct answer is A. Use a third-party labeling tool that supports multi-user workflows and export labels in normalized format. Let us look at the logic behind it. A purpose-built third-party labeling tool is designed to support multiple annotators working simultaneously, along with role-based assignment and review queues. Therefore, it aligns naturally with large-scale collaborative labeling workflows. In addition, these tools can export bounding boxes in normalized 0-1 coordinates or in a format that can be easily converted. Consequently, the labels remain compatible with APIs that expect normalized values. By contrast, switching to image classification removes bounding boxes entirely and no longer meets the detection requirement. Likewise, smart labelers require an initial trained model and cannot replace the first round of manual labeling. Limiting labeling to a single user also defeats the goal of parallel work without solving collaboration needs. As a result, using a third-party labeling tool with multi-user support and normalized exports is the best approach. Question 52. Match each Azure AI search feature with its correct description. Each item may be used once, more than once, or not at all. Indexes data from multiple structured and unstructured sources. Indexing. Enriches data using AI skills to derive new insights. Enrichment. Stores extracted knowledge for analysis and integration. Knowledge store. Now let us look at the logic behind it. Indexing is responsible for collecting data from different sources, whether structured like databases or unstructured like documents, and organizing it so it can be efficiently searched. Enrichment builds on that indexed data by applying AI skills such as OCR, language detection, or key phrase extraction, which means it adds new insights that were not explicitly present in the raw data. Knowledge store then takes the enriched output and persists it in a structured form so it can be analyzed further or integrated into other applications. As a result, these three features work together in sequence, starting with indexing, followed by enrichment, and finally storing the enriched knowledge for reuse. Question 53. A data engineer is configuring Azure AI Search to process documents that include both text and images. They want to extract text from every image and combine it with existing textual content for comprehensive searchability. Which combination of actions should they perform? Select two answers. A. Use an OCR skill to extract text from each normalized image. B. Skip normalization to avoid duplicate data. C. Add a merge skill to combine extracted image text with document text. D. Map all fields implicitly without specifying any skill outputs. The correct answers are A. Use an OCR skill to extract text from each normalized image, and C. Add a merge skill to combine extracted image text with document text. Let us go step by step. First, OCR is the capability that reads text inside images. Therefore, adding an OCR skill ensures every embedded image is processed so its visible text becomes available for indexing. Next, a merge skill combines the OCR output with the document's original text. Consequently, both sources of content end up in a unified searchable field, improving recall and completeness in search results. By contrast, skipping normalization prevents consistent image handling in the enrichment pipeline. Likewise, fields are not mapped automatically, so skill outputs must be explicitly connected to target index fields. As a result, OCR plus merge is the correct combination to meet the requirement. Question 54. An engineering team builds a document analyzer for invoices and wants to improve extraction accuracy. They already defined fields and types in their schema, but want the analyzer to understand the structure better during creation. What should they include to achieve this? Select one answer. A. Use shorter field names to simplify parsing. B. Attach a representative sample document within the JSON analyzer definition. C. Reduce the number of defined fields to make the analyzer smaller. D. Skip schema configuration entirely and rely on defaults. The correct answer is B. Attach a representative sample document within the JSON analyzer definition. Now let us look at the logic behind it. When you include a representative sample document, the analyzer can see how real invoice data is laid out. As a result, it learns where fields typically appear and how values relate to one another. Consequently, this context improves how accurately the analyzer maps schema fields to actual content during extraction. In practice, it is similar to showing a student a worked example before asking them to solve a problem. By contrast, shorter field names do not influence understanding of document structure. Likewise, reducing fields limits what can be extracted, and skipping schema configuration removes essential guidance altogether. Therefore, attaching a representative sample document is the correct and most effective approach. Question 55. For each statement below, indicate whether the answer is true or false. The unit property identifies the measurement unit for coordinates. True. The width and height values correspond to the dimensions of each page in the analyzed file. True. The warnings array lists any issues encountered during analysis. True. The unit and angle properties are part of the analyzer's configuration, not the output. False. Now let us understand why this is correct. First, the unit property tells you the measurement system being used, such as pixels, which is essential for interpreting coordinates accurately. Similarly, width and height describe the actual page dimensions, allowing extracted elements like text or tables to be mapped correctly onto the page. In addition, the warnings array plays a practical role by surfacing issues encountered during analysis, for example, low-quality input or partially recognized content. This helps reviewers understand potential limitations in the results. However, the final statement is false because unit and angle are not configuration settings. Instead, they are returned as part of the analyzer's output for each page, reflecting how the content was processed. That is why the first three statements are true, while the last one is false. Question 56. Fill in the blanks by selecting the correct options from the drop-down menus. To capture merchant contact details and when a purchase occurred, use the receipt model. to extract merchant phone and address, and the transaction date and time directly from a scanned receipt image. Now let us walk through the reasoning. The receipt model is designed specifically for scanned receipts. Therefore, it understands common receipt layouts such as store headers, contact details, and transaction metadata. As a result, it can reliably identify merchant phone numbers and addresses without manual configuration. Moreover, receipts always include a purchase timestamp, so the model is trained to recognize transaction date and time as a standard field. This makes it ideal for expense tracking and reconciliation scenarios. For example, when an employee scans a store receipt using a mobile app, the receipt model can immediately extract who the merchant is, how to contact them, and exactly when the purchase was made. Consequently, this reduces manual data entry and improves accuracy in financial workflows. Question 57. Which of the following metadata fields are included in a successful analyzed document JSON response? Select two answers. A. Created date time, confidence threshold. C. Model ID, document type. The correct answers are created date time and model ID. Now let us walk through the reasoning. Created date time captures the exact time the analysis request was initiated. Therefore, it provides traceability and helps teams audit when a document was processed, especially in large-scale document pipelines. Model ID identifies which trained model performed the analysis. As a result, this becomes critical when multiple models or versions are deployed, allowing engineers to validate results accurately. However, confidence threshold is not part of the JSON response metadata. Instead, it is a quality metric evaluated separately and not returned in the analyze output. Likewise, document type does not appear in the response metadata because the response focuses on execution details and results, not classification configuration information. Question 58. Within the Azure AI language JSON payload, what two arrays are contained inside the assets section of a classification project? Select answers. A. Classes, documents. B. C. Metadata, settings. D. The correct answers are classes and documents. Let us walk through the reasoning. Classes represents the full list of labels or categories that the classification model is trained to predict. Therefore, this array defines the possible outcomes the model can assign during inference. Documents contains the actual input files used during training or testing. Consequently, these documents are what the model learns from and evaluates against during the classification process. However, metadata is not stored inside the assets section. Instead, it exists at a higher level in the JSON structure and holds project-level configuration details. Similarly, settings are not part of assets because they are nested under metadata and control project behavior rather than training data. Let us connect this to how it works in real use when building a classification project. Assets focuses strictly on what the model learns from and predicts, while metadata and settings describe how the project itself is configured. Question 59. Within the Azure AI language REST payload, which field provides optional configuration parameters such as thresholds or custom options? Select one answer. Dataset. B. Project file version. C. Storage input container name. D. Metadata.settings. The correct answer is metadata.settings. Let us understand why this is correct. Metadata.settings is specifically designed to hold optional configuration values. Therefore, it is where thresholds, tuning values, and other custom behavior controls are defined beyond the required fields. Dataset, on the other hand, is used to indicate whether documents belong to training or testing data, so it does not control configuration behavior. Project file version simply identifies the schema version of the project file and does not contain adjustable parameters, storage input container name, points to the Azure storage container where input data is stored, which is about data location, not configuration logic. Question 60. You are designing a live voice assistant that must quickly detect when a user stops speaking so the agent can reply promptly. Which configuration parameters help achieve this behavior? Select one answer. A. Replacing servervad with input audio format.mp3 for better silence detection. B. Adding response done event handling before speech detection. C. Using only modality.text to reduce latency. D. Setting values for threshold, prefix padding MS, and silence duration MS in servervad. The correct answer is setting values for threshold, prefix padding MS, and silence duration MS in servervad. Let us walk through the reasoning. These servervad parameters directly control voice activity detection, meaning they define how sensitive the system is to speech, how much audio is buffered before speech starts, and how long silence must last before speech is considered finished. As a result, tuning these values allows the assistant to detect the end of user speech quickly and respond without delay. Replacing servervad with input audio format.mp3 does not help because MP3 only defines audio encoding, not silence detection logic. Adding response done event handling happens after a response is generated, so it does not affect how speech input is detected. Using only modality text disables audio input entirely, which removes speech detection instead of improving it. That is why configuring threshold, prefix padding MS, and silence duration MS in servervad is the correct and effective approach.